Hey everyone, how's it going? AZREN here. Hope you guys are doing well. In this video, I want to talk about a pretty interesting question, which is how multilingual are Canadians? There's a couple of different perspectives you can look at, and I want to sort of dive into these different perspectives. Now, the first one is you could say, yes, as a general whole, there are lots of Canadians who are multilingual. And there's a lot of truth to that statement, right? Especially in a lot of the big cities. First and foremost, because we have a lot of different immigration. We have a lot of immigrants from different parts of the world. And so naturally, these immigrants come in, they speak whatever language when they speak their first language, and they learn English because they're living in Canada, they're probably working in Canada, maybe they studied in Canada, etc. Also, these same people, these same immigrants who've come in, when they have families, their children often grow up speaking English because they live in Canada, and they grow up speaking whatever their family's language is. So myself, I grew up speaking Gujarati because that's what my family speaks, right? So I was kind of in that scenario, and that is a very common scenario you see all over Canada. Also, it's a different side of the coin, it's a different topic, but it is relevant. You have to look at things like immersion schools as well. So an immersion school basically means that instead of going to school in English, you go to school in a different language. So I did that for French. French immersion is very common in Canada. You can go to a school, study for the most part in French, and minimally in English. And so what happens is that once you've finished grade school, you have a decent level in French or in Spanish or whatever immersion program you went into. Also, for multilingualism, if you are from Quebec, it's a province on the east side of Canada, right? You guaranteed or basically guaranteed speak French because it is primarily a French province. And you probably, or many people in Quebec also have a decent level, if not a very high level, in English because they're part of a country that is, for the most part, Anglophone. And so that's another variable to look at, because if you're from that province, there's a good chance you speak two languages. Now, there's the other side of the coin to look at as well, that our multilingualism in Canada is driven, in my perspective anyway, from what I know, it's driven heavily by a lot of our immigration. And what happens is that, in my experience anyway, I don't have facts to support this, but this is my experience, and if you've got some facts that support otherwise, please let me know. But my experience is that a lot of people who are born in Canada, whose parents are from Canada, whose grandparents are born in Canada, in other words, who go back for many generations in Canada, these people are not necessarily the ones who are driving that multiculturalism, or excuse me, that multilingualism, right? If you go to other countries, that's not necessarily true. So a lot of countries like Peru or Colombia or Mexico, things like that, or even like really a lot of developing countries, often people in those countries are self-motivated to learn English, for example, because they want to go work in the United States, or they want to go work in England, or they want to work in Australia, they want to study in Canada, they want to go do stuff in English-speaking countries, and so they're self-motivated, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are self-motivated to go learn English or teach themselves English. And now that I'm really talking this out, in a lot of these other countries, English often will penetrate their media. So for instance, if you're listening to the radio, you might hear a lot of English songs. And so naturally, you might go Google, like, what do these lyrics mean? Like, what's going on in these songs? And so that penetration encourages people to be self-driven to go learn English, as an example. Another time in countries that you might have people who are multilingual, but not because of immigration, is if you look at countries, for example, in Europe, right? If you live in Spain, you might speak some level of French because maybe you travel to France on some level of frequency or relatively frequently because they're pretty close. They're pretty close to each other. And so there are countries that will learn other languages due to proximity to another nation or another country that speaks a different language. And so it's interesting to look at Canada because yes, we have a lot of multilingualism, but it's driven by people who are actually not from Canada. And so that's kind of where I think, yes, we're multilingual, but that's what it's driven by. And I think what would be very interesting is what would happen if our media in Canada started to get penetrated by different languages and different cultures more often. Because in Canada, at least in the major cities, right, it's very different. By the way, side note, but important one, this is a very different conversation if you leave the big cities. Like if you go to small towns, villages, I think then it's a completely different conversation altogether, because I think now you're heading into territory, at least based on my knowledge, where people, almost all of them are they speak one language, they speak English. That's my experience of it. I could be wrong, but I think that's how it works in a lot of the small towns and villages. But, however, right, that's something very different. But it'd be interesting to see what would happen if we had more penetration of, let's say, Spanish in our radio. Recently, Justin Bieber collabed with some Spanish reggaetoneros, and there's a Spanish song on our radio in Canada. And I was like, man, if we had more of that, I think more people would probably go and learn some level of Spanish, because it's relevant to them, right? Or, what's interesting, I'm just going on tangents now, because I'm getting more and more ideas, but Canada, at least in big cities, in my city, a lot of other big cities, we have a lot of cultural penetration, so people might partake in other people's cultures, Chinese New Year, things like, you know, Dia de los Muertos, things like that. But there's not a lot of linguistical penetration. Does that make sense? And so I think if we had more linguistical penetration in our country, I think that would drive a lot of people to be self-motivated to go learn other languages. So anyway, that's kind of my big blab on the topic. I hope you guys liked the video, and yeah, see you guys later. Bye for now.